Anthony. Our children can head out to Children's Church. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the service, we are asking children 6th grade and below to go out today. Hillary said that they will be in the youth room upstairs, so you can go get your children from there when we're done. Now again, we're asking this because of the content of our sermon today, and even when I mentioned that at the beginning, I could already sense people getting nervous. Like, uh-oh, here we go again. But I want to say from the get-go, I do promise, 100%, that our time today will not be as in-depth or direct or awkward as my sermon from our marriage series, to where I also asked the children to leave. But there are issues in here in our text today that need to be addressed, and I want to be able to do it directly, and I want to be able to do it frankly. I don't want to have to skirt around issues, trying to find different ways to say them because of young ears in the room. Not that it's wrong for children, especially 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, to begin to be taught these things and to learn these things. I just think that place is for the place of parents, for you to do in your own time and in your own way. Not necessarily for them to figure it out from me and then come to you, but for them to come to you. But I want to be able to speak directly to those who are old enough to need this right now. Many of these issues that we're going to talk about today are issues that aren't addressed by churches because of the nature of it, okay? It's weird, it's awkward. There are people of different ages in the room, and so oftentimes it just goes unaddressed. And I believe that is to the detriment of Christians, in particular teenagers. Some of this stuff people can grow up in the church for decades and never hear proper biblical teaching on it. And our topic today is going to be on that of lust. It's the next passage that comes in the Sermon on the Mount that Jesus is dealing with. And so if you're there with me in Matthew chapter 5, you can follow along as I read verses 27 through 30. You have heard that it was said, "You shall not commit adultery." But I say to you that everyone who looks at a woman with lustful intent has already committed adultery with her in his heart. If your right eye causes you to sin, tear it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of your members than that your whole body go into hell. Lust is a serious and even deadly topic. All right? It is a sin that Jesus makes clear can bankrupt your soul. It can bankrupt your family. It can bankrupt your life. It leads to hell. Psalm chapter 24, verses 3 through 4 says this: "Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. Who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart." Now, certainly the only one that this applies to perfectly is Jesus. If the standard was you have to be perfectly clean and perfectly pure, no one could stand before God except Jesus. Of course, because of Jesus and his work on the cross, our sin has been placed upon Jesus, his righteousness and his perfection placed upon us. Therefore, we will have that opportunity. But these words also describe the way that we should desire, all right? It describes the life of anyone who should desire to follow Jesus, okay? Since Jesus was a man of perfectly clean and perfectly pure hearts, therefore those of us who desire to follow Jesus should desire pure hearts and clean hands as well. In our day-to-day relationship with God, we should desire to approach God in purity and cleanliness, all right? But I never, ever growing up, honestly, heard much on this teaching. Growing up, I was in a good, strong church, one that set the basis for my faith, that set me on the path that I'm on today. It was the church in which I answered the call to the ministry, that I was mentored in ministry, that ordained me in ministry, that taught me the gospel, that led me to faith in Christ. I would not be where I am today without that church. But I never, ever received teaching on this topic. All I ever heard was that lust and sexual immorality was wrong. That was the extent of it. All right? And that I needed to wait until I got married to have sex. And then once I got married, I should not have sex with anyone than the person that I married. That was the extent of sexual teaching growing up. Great, wonderful, biblically sound church. Nothing other than don't have sex. That's it. And for the most part, what I've come to find out is that's been true for everybody else. That's the teaching. Don't do it until you get married, and then only have it with the person you're married to. I was never taught why things were wrong. We were never taught how to deal with desires and passions and thoughts and temptations. We're never taught how to live in righteousness, even in light of a world that is constantly seducing us into sin and lustful temptations. And this topic of lust is a serious, serious issue. Again, Jesus says it is better to deal drastically with it than let this sin lead you to hell. I want to remind you of what I said last week when we're talking about anger. And the quote from the great Puritan pastor Thomas Watson. Thomas Watson said this: "When lust or anger burn in the soul, Satan warms itself at its fire." When lust or anger burn in the soul, Satan warms himself at its fire. Lust is dangerous and destructive, and it is an invitation to great evil. The pastor and author D.A. Carson says this: "We are to deal drastically with sin. We must not pamper it, flirt with it, enjoy nibbling a little of it around the edges. We are to hate it, crush it, dig it out. Sin leads to hell, and that is the ultimate reason why sin must be taken seriously." And today, with the topic of adultery and lust, it is no different. Now, I could pick from one of a plethora of verses in the book of Proverbs. The book of Proverbs is replete with warnings and danger of adultery and lust. But Proverbs 6:32 says this: "He who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself." I could go on and on and on about adultery. But Jesus honestly began his teaching with the assumption that we all know that the physical act of adultery is wrong. And I don't think any of you need that pleading. Now there was a section that I had in here going on about the dangers of it, maybe to help keep you away from it, even though you know it's wrong. Sometimes we're willing to overlook the dangers to partake in it. But for sake of time, I had to leave that out. I'm trusting that we know and we understand that the physical act of adultery is wrong. Jesus told the Pharisees that they were not righteous for merely not committing the physical act of adultery. But Jesus took it a step further and said that if they look at a woman with lustful intent, that they have already committed adultery with her in their hearts. Jesus is not merely concerned with the physical act, but just like with murder, as we talked about last week, he is concerned with the heart from which the physical act came. The heart that Jesus deals with today is the heart of lust. And so, the first part of this sermon, I'm going to give you 3 truths about lust. 3 truths about the heart of lust. These are on your outlines if you have those. Number 1 is this, is that lust is an issue of the heart. Lust is an issue of the heart. Just like with anger, okay? Just like with anger. I told you last week, nobody can make you angry. You cannot say, "Oh, he just makes me so angry. These kids just drive me crazy." All right, they may be the occasion for your anger, but they cannot make you angry. You are responding to those circumstances in anger because of the nature of your own heart. All right? So too, no female, no male can make you lust. I don't care how provocatively they are dressed. I don't care how long it has been since your wife has been intimate with you. No one can make you lust. Lust is of your own heart. Look, this goes back to the well-known principle that I've taught you guys called the squash principle, right? Satan can only tempt me with things that I already crave. For instance, I will never, and I repeat, ever be tempted to eat squash. Never. It is impossible, all right? People come to me, y'all hear me talk about this, and inevitably, I'm sure some of you will do it now. Every time people come to me and say, well, Pastor, you must have never had it in a casserole. Yes, I did, and it was even worse. The only thing worse than squash is squash casserole. They say, well, have you ever had it fried? All right, I don't want it fried, all right, because it's still in the middle of it. Have you ever had this or this done to it? Everybody comes thinking that they can convince me that I will like squash. Listen, there is nothing you can do. You can dip it in chocolate, and I am not going to be tempted by it. Jesus himself can come down and cook it in the most heavenly way, and no one will be able to get me to eat that devilish food, okay? It's not going to happen. But donuts, that's a different story. I don't even have to see it. I just see an orange sign that says hot now, and I'm pulling into the store, right? I cannot be tempted by something that I hate. Satan can only tempt me with that which I already desire. Lust is not about your wife and how much she has fulfilled you. It's not about finding a wife. For you single people out there, it's not about finding a wife. And once you find a wife and begin to be intimate with her, then all of your lust will go away. It's not about how fulfilling your wife is now or finding a wife so that she can fulfill you. It's not about all these ladies dressing more modestly, which I will stop and say they should dress more modestly. That's just another topic for another time. But we cannot blame our lust on women not dressing more modestly. The issue is you and your own heart. Truth number 2 about lust. Lust is a craving for self-fulfillment. Lust is a craving for self-fulfillment. This is why it's not just sex that you can lust after. You can lust after food, after reputation, after money, after possessions. You can lust after anything. If you are continually seeking something of this life to fill you and satisfy you, then you are lusting. It's just that it's most often seen in sexual immorality and honestly followed by a close second in regards to gluttony, the sin of overeating, because those two sins have to do with natural desires. God gave us sexual desires, and God gave us desires to eat food for a reason, because to reproduce you have to have sex, so He gave us a desire to have sex, and then on top of that, because He's a good God, He made sex a good thing. Same thing with food. For us to live, you have to eat. Therefore, He gives us hunger so that we won't forget to eat. And then because He's a good God, He made eating good. He could have made everything taste like dirt. But instead, He gave us donuts and fried chicken, right? And things like that. The devil came up with squash, but God gave us good things, right? He could have made everything bland. But He gave us a desire because we need that desire. Then because He's good, He made that good, yet because of our sin, we overdo it with both of those desires. All right? Now, lust is in contrast to love. Lust is in contrast to love. Whereas lust craves self-fulfillment, listen to this, love is a denying of self-fulfillment to meet the need of another. All right? Lust is a craving for self-fulfillment. Love is a denying of self-fulfillment to meet the need of another. And this is why lusting after someone else is wrong. It is picturing and imagining someone else for your own pleasure. You have made them an object for your own gain. I was asked in seminary by a professor, they asked, if we thought it was possible to lust after your own spouse. At first, I thought he was crazy. I mean, of course not, I thought. You were to be sexually free within the bounds of marriage. But see, my idea at that point in life, and most of the time growing up, because I was never taught about lust other than just don't have sex until you're married, I assumed that any sexual thought or any sexual anything was wrong. And so, therefore, in my mindset is you can't lust after your wife because now that you're married, you can have sex and you're to enjoy it and you're to be free and all of these things. But the more I began to study about lust is absolutely you can lust after your own spouse. I can lust after my own wife because if she is just merely an object for my own gratification, then I am not loving her. I'm just using her for my own selfish gain. That's not love. That's lust. Even if we are free to do whatever in the bounds of marriage, that's not love. That's lust. Truth number 3, lust never satisfies us. Lust never satisfies us. Solomon tells us in Proverbs 27:20 that the eyes of man are never satisfied. One more lustful look, likewise one more piece of pie, never satisfies. In fact, quite the opposite is true. Every time we say yes to temptation, we make it harder and harder to say no the next time. And that's because we're created in a way to where we become accustomed to whatever level of happiness we've achieved. All right? So something that's exciting to me one time, the more I partake of it, the less and less exciting it gets every time, to where I begin to have to want, for me to find excitement, I have to seek something greater and greater. And it just continues and continues and continues until we just crave whatever's next. And this is the same with anything. You know, we parents, we see it with kids on Christmas morning. They are overjoyed and thrilled and happy with what they get for a few hours, until they want something more and bigger and better. God created this life to only temporarily satisfy us so that we will not find our satisfaction in the world, but rather in something greater than the world, in Christ. But if we keep looking to the world, we will get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper into sin because it will never satisfy us. I've never met anybody who had an affair that just out of the blue went from being righteous to having an affair like that. It started out as thoughts. Then it started out as intentionally having a conversation. Then it went to maybe physical contact in some way, even if it's brushing up against them. Then it's moving to spending time together. Then it's moving to flirting. Then it's moving to private time alone. Then the full-blown adultery. All right? It may not follow every one of those steps, but it is progressive. Because that's what sin does to us, all right? So I want to spend the rest of the time in the sermon. All right, again, we know that lust is wrong. I did want to deal with the nature of lust because it's going to help us understand repentance. But we know that adultery is wrong. We know affairs are wrong. We know that lust is wrong, okay? Now then, how do I biblically deal with it? How do I live in righteousness in the world in which we currently live, all right? Point number 1 is this. And it might seem simple, but it's more in depth than this. Point number 1 is this: believe the gospel. Believe the gospel. For many people today, they've been addicted to pornography for so long, they don't even remember not being addicted to it. And they've lived in guilt for decades, to the point that they may have given up hope. Maybe it's not full-fledged pornography, but it's just the continual battle with lust. For many teenagers, the urges and temptations are so strong, it's like it takes over your body, leaving you no hope. I want you to listen to some scripture, though. Romans chapter 5, verse 20. For those who may have given up and said it's pointless, Paul says, "But where sin increased, grace increased all the more." But where sin increased, grace increased all the more. No matter how terrible pornography is, no matter how much trouble you are in, no matter how flimsy and weak your resources are to repent, you are never in a pit so deep that the grace of Jesus cannot lift you out. All right? Regardless of what it is you're battling. No matter how serious it is, no matter how long it's been in there, no matter how weak you think you are never in a pit so deep that grace cannot lift you out. All right? The gospel is about making all things new. So point number one, believe the gospel. The gospel is about making all things new, taking a dead heart and making it alive, a sinful heart and making it righteous, a lustful heart and making it pure. It's about taking an enemy of God and turning him into a friend and a son of God. There is absolutely no sin that is too great for the grace of God. Now, why is this important? How is this going to help me in my battle against lust? Let me ask you this. What happens when we lose hope? What happens in our fight against sin when we lose hope? We typically give up, right? That's why so many of you women find yourself sitting on the couch watching Netflix with a whole gallon of ice cream or a bag of chips. And you go all the way through it, right? What's the point? It could be we've just given up in our battle for health. Maybe we're upset about something else. No matter what I do as parents, my children rebel. No matter what I do, my husband's not happy. And so what's the point? So I'm just going to give up and eat my sorrows away. When we think there's no hope, we give up. And many people in their fight against lust say, I'm going to lose anyways, and I'm tired of fighting, so I might as well just go on and give in. Regardless of what your fight is, I want you to listen today. Jesus did not die on the cross for you to give up and give in. He died on the cross to make you new. He died on the cross to take your sin. The second reason believing the gospel can be helpful to you is because you know and understand that righteousness is far better than whatever gain you're getting from your sin. Okay? Every time we're tempted with sin, regardless of whether it's lust, whatever sin it is, every time we are tempted with sin, we are faced with a question: is this worth it? Will this action be better for my life than not partaking of it? And what's happening in that moment is Satan is taking that desire that's already in you and that outside temptation that just caught your eye. All right, you're trying to lose weight. You're fighting gluttony. You're wanting donuts and you're riding down the road and poof, that orange light comes on. All right? Satan flicked that light on, working with the desires in your own heart. And so, we're in a moment. Is this worth it? And he wants you to believe the lie that yes, it is worth it. Listen to me. Sin never is. Sin is never worth it. Little do we realize just how critical that moment is in our fight against sin, and who and what is far more valuable to us: Jesus Christ. Jay Adams, in his book Killing Sin Habits, says this: when you indulge in sexual sin, it reveals what you truly believe about sexuality. You believe that the pleasure of sin is better than the pleasure of obeying God by enjoying sex the way God created it to be enjoyed. You believe that the pleasure you desire from your sin is greater than the consequences your sin will have on you and those around you. You believe that your momentary pleasure is greater than the rewards the Lord has for you, both in this life and the life to come. Every time we're in that moment of should I look at pornography or not, we are faced with the battle: is looking at this better for my life than not? And will we trust God that resisting and fighting it is more valuable for me than indulging my desires? Teenagers, listen, every one of you. I remember growing up as a child, and I'm sure your parents do as well, being warned over and over and over about the dangers of drug use. You know, I don't know if they're still doing it now, but when I was growing up, they had the DARE program, drug use resistance education. They had the policemen come in, and they taught us. And so not only was I always hearing about the dangers of drug use, but I saw people who had been on drugs, and I didn't want my life to turn out like theirs. For one thing, I've never been offered drugs in my life. A lot has to do because I've rarely been in positions to where that would even be a possibility. But secondly, if I was offered drugs, because I know the dangers of it, it would not even be a temptation for me. If I had the opportunity to partake of heroin or crack cocaine, that would be utterly ridiculous. Why would I ever want to do that? Teenagers, listen up. Pornography is just as dangerous or more dangerous. Scientific studies have shown it affects the exact same part of the brain that drug abuse does, and the addiction to pornography is just as strong or stronger than drug abuse. One, because it is readily available everywhere. Okay? I've seen it ruin lives, ruin marriages. I counseled a guy last year, not from around here, nobody that any of you would know. He got fired from his job. This was a grandfather. Got fired from his job because he got hooked on it. Took control when he started looking at it at work, and they found out about it. 6 months away from retirement. Fired. His children know about it. Grandchildren know about it. So teenagers, when you are tempted to use that phone, that computer, whatever, when you know that it is easily accessible, your thoughts of pornography and lust should be no different than if crack cocaine or heroin or some other heavy drug were right there. Of course not. Why would I ruin my life with that? But remember this, not just teenagers, everybody, all right? Pornography and lust is not worth it, but Christ is. Christ is. Number two, in regards to repenting, is radical amputation. Radical amputation. Jesus said in this Matthew chapter 5 passage to cut off your right eye if your right eye is causing you to sin, and to chop off your right hand if your right hand is causing you to sin. Of course, he is not wanting us to mutilate ourselves, but he is wanting us to remove sinful temptations from our lives and add a radical measure. It might mean that you have to quit your job because of the temptation of another woman in there. You are worried that you cannot control yourself and your relationship with her will lead down a wrong path. Maybe you have to leave a job. I mean, that's serious. You have to find new routes to work. All kinds of different things for different sins. But for those in pornography, it means massive changes in your life. You no longer have access to the internet. But Pastor, do you know what year it is, 2020? I mean, how can I even live? I'm too dependent on my phone. I depend on my phone for everything. Listen, people for thousands of years lived without the internet. And there are people today who do so as well. And you can too. Remember what Jesus said about the dangers of sin. Yes, giving up the internet will be an inconvenience, but it is far better than the path lust will lead you down. I would suggest to you not having a smartphone at all. If having a smartphone is necessary, then you have an accountability partner that knows the password to your phone, who sets a passcode in your restrictions part of your phone. The accountability partner then takes off all internet browsers, cuts off website access to your phone so that browsers cannot be accessed through other apps. The accountability partner, through the restrictions part of the phone, restricts the app store so you can't download any other apps to partake of your lust. It means that you delete apps such as Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, Snapchat, to where pornography is readily available. You change your phone down to the most basic it can be, and you literally have no access to any of the changes. Radical amputation. On your computer at home, there's software called Covenant Eyes that monitors everything and filters all inappropriate content. Those truly serious about righteousness will be willing to take those measures. Those who are still content to partake in the lust of their hearts will not. Those who say, I know and I understand the danger of the sin and I'm ready to change, I believe the gospel, that the gospel is better for me, will be willing to do whatever it takes to live in righteousness. But not only radical amputation, but radical accountability. Radical accountability. Listen, you cannot fight this alone. I realize this might be an embarrassing sin, but you need help. Is it embarrassing? Yes, but you need help. This is an evil that you cannot fight alone. You need help. I cannot say that enough. You need someone who is willing to hold you accountable, is willing to ask you the tough questions, who's willing to check your phone and your computer without warning, who's willing to hold the passcodes to your restrictions, who will meet with you to spiritually help you. Listen, guys, I am your pastor. Come talk to me. Parents, you find things on your child's cell phone. I realize it's awkward. Don't leave them to figure it out on their own. Get help. Let's deal with it. Let's teach your teenager how to deal with these dangers and these desires and these passions that they're dealing with. Don't leave them to find it out on their own. I heard an interview this week from some young ladies that were involved in the adult industry. And they all got, for one thing, first involved in pornography. All three of them said this: because they had questions about sex that nobody in their life was willing to answer. But they knew that the answers were only one click away, so they found the answers themselves. If we, as parents and grandparents, if we as the church don't provide these answers, they will find the answers themselves, and it's not the answers that the Lord provides. Okay? And I also want to be clear, pornography is not just a male issue, though there's much, much more males who struggle with it than females, but with how prevalent it has become, it is growing astronomically among the female gender as well. Fourth, in our fight against lust, those other three are kind of general answers. This is getting more specific, okay? Fourth, replace lustful thoughts with loving thoughts. Replace lustful thoughts with loving thoughts. So often, people who are struggling with lust, they try to stop lusting by trying to get themselves to stop thinking about immoral things. But here's the thing. You cannot make yourself stop thinking about something by trying to get yourself to stop thinking about it. Because the fact that you're thinking about how to stop thinking about it means you're thinking about it. Right? If I told everybody out here for the next 5 seconds, don't think about a blue elephant, every one of you are going to be thinking about a blue elephant. Okay? So you cannot stop thinking about something merely by trying to stop thinking about something. So the way you make yourself stop thinking immoral thoughts is not just merely trying to stop, but by replacing the thought with something else. And we replace immoral thoughts with righteous thoughts. And as it pertains to lust, we replace it primarily with that of love. For those who are married, God gave you a spouse as your helper. And yes, it is to help in this too. 1 Corinthians chapter 7 speaks to engaged couples that if you are burning with lust and cannot control yourself, that it is better to go on and get married and fulfill those desires within marriage than to fall into sin. Sex within marriage is an outlet for these desires that we have. And so for spouses out here, and look, again, I'm not trying to stereotype. This goes both ways. Again, typically it's the man who has a stronger desire, but it's not always that way, okay? The spouses are there to help each other. And this is one of those things. Wives, God gave you to your husband to help him be righteous. And he expects you to keep it. He says the only reason that you should not be doing it is when you are fasting from it to pray. Jesus' words, not mine, okay? It's an expectation. You are to be helping. So when we're dealing with this, we're trying to overcome these lustful thoughts. We look to our helper and we replace those thoughts with this, okay? So when lust hits, what does this look like in fighting these thoughts of lust? I'm walking down the road. I'm at the store. I'm watching TV, and boom, I see someone. Temptation hits. I'm triggered. Now my mind is down that trail that inevitably and has always led to sin. How will I recover so that I don't go down that trail again? Hopefully, I've amputated all the ways that I typically feed that sin. Maybe I have an accountability partner that I can contact and ask for their help. I'm setting my mind on the God of hope and the greatness of the gospel to overcome sin. And then I start replacing these thoughts. Instead of thinking about that woman that I just saw, get this, and this is crazy, shocking even. Instead of thinking about the woman you just saw, think about your wife. That's a new thought. Think about your wife, dead serious. Make a list about your wife. Make a list about her, about things that you love, her physical attributes, all right? Body parts, her personality, physical things about her, emotional things about her, spiritual things about her, mental. Everything you can think about her, begin to set your mind on the one that God gave you to help you in your battle against sin. And so instead of trying to get yourself to stop thinking about that other woman, just think about your wife. I'm sure your wife will not be upset about that, right? Think about ways that you can go home and serve your wife. Instead of daydreaming about that other woman who just set off that temptation, stop and buy your wife flowers. You know, there's something exciting about planning a surprise for somebody. Whether it's something small like buying your wife flowers or planning a trip or something like a surprise party, there's excitement. The anticipation builds, right? Our mind's on it. We're thinking about it. We're looking forward to it. Some might be saying, and in particular, you teenagers, but what about me? I'm not married. I can't think on a spouse. Well, you're right. Maybe you don't have a spouse you can serve, maybe you don't have a spouse you can set your mind on. And I will say this, the answer is not then to set your mind on your girlfriend or boyfriend. That is not what they are there for. All right? This would be my advice to you. Maybe you don't have a spouse you can set your mind on. Maybe you don't have a spouse you can serve, but there are others that you can serve. Right? Who else in my life can I serve? If lust is inherently self-centered, then get your mind off yourself and replace those thoughts with thoughts of others. Love God and love others. Fifth and finally, seek gratitude. Seek gratitude. Lust is selfishness. It's greed. Lust is selfishness and greed. Greedy lust undercuts gladness, while gratitude produces gladness. Lust undercuts gladness, while gratitude produces gladness. Think about this. Lust is thinking of something better than you currently have, thus making you less content with what you have and more frustrated. When you let your mind wander and daydream and fantasize and lust about other people, other situations, what happens is you come home and now you're discontent that your wife or husband is not fulfilling what you have been daydreaming and fantasizing about all day. Even for teenagers. All right, fantasy is not real life. I can guarantee you, mark it down 100%, No teenage boy, no single man has ever fantasized about having a desire for your wife and your wife saying, no, I'm too tired. 100% guarantee it. Because fantasy is not real life. And so the more we lust and set our minds on things that are not real life, the more discontent and unhappy we become with real life. Right? But whereas lust undercuts gladness, gratitude and thankfulness makes you more glad for what God has already given you. Okay? So again, you're at the store, somebody walks by, boom, you're triggered, you've started down that path. What am I going to do? Okay? You begin to replace those thoughts with thoughts about your wife, with how to serve her, maybe how to serve other people, but you also begin to make a list of things that you can be thankful for in your life. Maybe it is things specifically about your wife. Maybe it's things about your children. Maybe it's things about whatever. Every good and perfect thing is given to us by God. Therefore, that is an infinite, never-ending list. Okay? And honestly, on your phone, in the Notes app, whatever app you have, keep a running list. Maybe you're somebody who likes to write. Have a little notebook. Keep a running list. And so when those temptations come, I'm pulling it out, and instead of thinking, oh, James, stop thinking that, boom, suddenly I'm serving my wife, I'm thinking on my wife, I'm thanking God for the many ways He's blessed me, and I'm replacing those thoughts with godly thoughts. Now, is that easier said than done? Absolutely. Which is why we need help. Guys, don't fight it alone. Don't let embarrassment and an idol of reputation keep you away from righteousness. Ask for help. If not from me, then another friend who will come alongside of you and help you walk this path. I want to remind you of two things from the very beginning of the sermon. The two scriptures that I read. Proverbs 6:32, he who commits adultery lacks sense. He who does it destroys himself. In contrast, Psalm 24:3-4, who may ascend the mountain of the Lord? Who may stand in his holy place? The one who has clean hands and a pure heart, who does not trust in an idol or swear by a false god. We're going to enter into our time of response, and I'm going to ask Anthony if he could come up and for our time of response sing Grace Greater Than Our Sin, because we need to be reminded of that today. Wherever you are, we need that reminder. Let's go to the Lord in prayer.